Welcome to the BookBlast podcast. Today I'm with Narisa Chakrabongse, the founder and CEO of River Books, which publishes a wide range of books on Southeast Asian art and culture, and she is the editor of the Oxford River Books English-Thai Dictionary. Chakrabongse Villas, the family home, is a small boutique hotel in Bangkok. Narisa, which was your first language, Thai or English?
English just, I think, but Thai came very quickly after because we went out to Thailand when I was 18 months. And so I grew up really speaking both.
So your parents were both Thai, English.
Yeah.
Where did you grow up? I mean, tell us a bit about your childhood and where you grew up and what it was like between both cultures.
My father was half Thai and half Russian. My mother was Scottish and English. And I grew up in Cornwall, which was a total contrast to Bangkok. And Bangkok, we had this house on the border of the river. I'm saying au bord de la, on the edge of the river, Chapia, in old Bangkok. And so there was a huge contrast between the two. And in those days it took, we always went by boat because my father didn't like to go to fly. And so that took about 3 or 4 weeks. Wow. So it was a lot of travelling, and the only sad thing, of course, is that my father died when I was 7. And he was quite old-fashioned in his ways, and so I didn't see him very much. And we didn't really talk to each other properly, not like parents today. Whereas my mother was, and while he was alive, my mother was very much with him. And then she died when I was 15, so I didn't have a huge family life, really. We lived in this big house in Cornwall in the middle of nowhere, on the top of a hill looking over down to the river. It was beautiful, but it was quite isolated, and so I had quite a isolated childhood in Cornwall and then a more integrated sort of childhood in Bangkok. But obviously I always felt also quite the odd one out in a way, because I spoke very good Thai, but I don't look very Thai at all. I look quite Western, very Western.
So you had no cousins or aunties? I mean, was there any extended family? Because that's very rough.
My English family didn't really like my father, I don't think. Oh. And, because they got married in the late 1930s. Yeah. And I think they disapproved of him. He was a Thai prince, but also half Russian. And so I think there was quite a lot of racism. And cousins, I did have some English cousins who I got to know, but after my mother died, I went to live with an aunt and we didn't really get on, and so I stopped seeing my English family essentially. And that's actually when I discovered all my Thai cousins, because I'm part of a huge extended family in Thailand, and so I have about 180 cousins. So recently at the coronation of the new king, I went to that. One time we were all in a room, 180 cousins, all waiting for him to turn up.
How did the Thai-Russian mix happen with your father? I mean, can you
so my father,
that
it is quite interesting. In fact, I wrote a book about it.
With a title?
With a title, Katya and the Prince of Siam. Because my grandfather on my father's side was one of the sons of King Chulalongkorn, and he had a policy of sending his favourite sons, or his most important sons, to Europe to study, so that they would come back with Western ideas, help modernise the country. Most of them went to Britain, some went to Germany, a few to Denmark, but only one went to Russia initially, and that was my grandfather. And Tsar Nicholas II, on his Far Eastern tour, had met King Chulalongkorn, and later on they became friends, and he said, "You must send one of your children to me."
So he ended up at the imperial court.
Yes, and he was, and unlike some of the others who came to study abroad, he was paid for completely by Nicholas II. So he had an apartment in the Winter Palace, and he went to the Corps des Pages, and then he went into the Hussars. And luckily he was quite bright, so he studied very hard, and in the end he came top of his class. And at the Corps des Pages you also had to wait on the imperial family if you were in the top 5. So he was the page to Empress Alexandra. And so while he was there, he wrote a lot of letters home, and actually I also translated those into English, and that was published last year, and that was called Letters from St. Petersburg. So that was a very interesting side of his life. Unfortunately, he died quite young, when he was only 37. But while he was there, at the end of his stay, he met my grandmother, who was also she was an orphan. She'd come to study nursing in St. Petersburg. She was only 16, and she wanted to go and nurse in the Russo-Japanese War, which in fact she did. And then when she came back to St. Petersburg, they eloped and got married in Constantinople, as it was then.
They eloped?
Yes.
So you mean that was already, I suppose, mixed in the day. People really, in a lot of societies actually,
were totally taboo, and also
taboo wherever you were. Whatever
and if you're a member of
culture.
the royal family in those days, they were very, you couldn't marry out really.
No,
And
very rigid.
Very rigid. And so he took her to Singapore and hid her there for a few months.
He hid her?
Yes, he just kept her there, went back to Bangkok pretending nothing had happened. And then one day his father said, I hear there's a Madame de Pisnolok living in Singapore, presumably that's a joke. And he said, no, it's true. And that was a terrible scandal. Yeah.
But in the end...
accepted by the Queen. When my grandmother got pregnant, had a baby, the Queen was obviously very keen to see her first grandchild. And so she and my grandmother became friends. And the King actually never met my grandmother because he died in 1910. But in the next reign, she was more accepted.
Right.
And then it all ends terribly sadly. My grandfather and my grandmother divorced after the revolution. She said, I'm so depressed, I need a holiday. So she went away for 6 months, leaving him in Thailand. And during that period, he got together with one of his nieces, actually. It's all quite scandalous, but in those, it was sort of accepted.
Those days it was much,
And when my grandmother came back, he wanted to keep them both. And she said no, and she left and divorced him. And then shortly afterwards, he died of Spanish flu, or maybe just overwork. Or maybe he was poisoned. We could never find out. And then my father, who's 12...
when she went back to...
She went to live in Shanghai.
Oh, she went to live in Shanghai.
Because her brother, who'd worked, he was in the railways, and he'd been helping with White Russian refugees.
Right. Oh, yes.
So she worked there, and then she met someone who worked for General Electric, an American, and got married to him, which was and then apparently, I mean, I never really knew him, but apparently no one liked him. His stepson and my mother didn't really like him. My father didn't like him.
So your father was... so he was the first... I mean, he was the son who initially the Queen accepted, was pleased to see her.
Yes.
So, and then if you've got all the cousins, then, I mean...
He was always discriminated against. I think no brothers and
So
sisters.
just him. Yeah.
But then two of his uncles became king after his father died.
Right.
But because he was mixed race, there was a succession law which said that anyone who was mixed race couldn't ascend the throne. Because originally the sort of line of succession was meant to go through my great-grandmother. So there was King Rama VI, King Rama VII, but then it passed to another of King Chulalongkorn's wives, who's the great-grandmother of the previous king, and the great-great-grandmother, maybe the great-grandmother of the current king.
Wow. So they were growing up between two cultures, two languages, also being mixed. So that is, how did you, growing up with that, how does one integrate that?
I think it did bother me quite a lot, really. I didn't like it.
Because school, I mean, what happened with school?
In Cornwall, it was fine. In Cornwall, I just pretended to be a local kid, Yeah. In Thailand, after my father died, he insisted I went to school in Thailand as well. So I did this thing where I did 1 term in Thailand, 2 terms in England.
That's very confusing.
And probably illegal nowadays,
Laws about taking children out of school.
Yes.
Indeed. Well, stability does.
Yes.
It is important.
So in the Thai school, I was racially discriminated against, They'd say white dog or white this or white that, And also I couldn't, I was trying to catch up too. Imagine doing 1 term in the school year. Tricky.
Yeah, so then one gets a complex.
Never mind.
Obviously, certainly it's given you somewhere in the end strength, perhaps in the end how one turns that.
Well, I mean, I speak perfect Thai and read and write it, which has been, as my career has turned out, it's been very lucky.
As a writer, editor, publisher. So now your parents, so goodness, what kind of books? Was there an interesting mix of books? Did you read a lot? Did they read a lot?
My father was a writer, and so he read a lot, and we had a big library.
What kind of writing?
He wrote history books.
History.
and also he wrote his autobiography, both in Thai. It's called, in English it's out of print, and I'm thinking of combining the English one with the Thai one. The Thai one's more fun in a way. It's more intimate, I think. The English one, I think he, must have suffered from discrimination, so he tried to present a front of being frightfully English and frightfully,
Oh, yes, of course.
and to try and sort of compensate. And so the English one was called The Twain Have Met, from that quote, yes, and brought up in England, because he loved England. I mean, he loved it. He loved Britain, I should say, I suppose. And then the Thai one's called Gert Wang Parut, and then he also wrote Lords.
What is
born
that?
in Puruskawan Palace.
Born in
Puruskawan Palace, which is where he was born. And then he wrote a history of the kings of the Chakri dynasty called Lords of Life, and he wrote it both in English and in Thai. And I've just been re-editing the English version because it's 60 years since it was published. So that's one of the things I've been working on at the moment.
Look forward to that from River Books, perhaps.
Yes, Lords of Life. But actually this year it's coming in. And I've put in a lot of photos, in the autumn. It's almost ready. I'm doing the index. We didn't talk about books at all, and he didn't read to me, really.
Yeah.
I mean, so I read English classics, Winnie the Pooh, Wind in the Willows, the Just So stories, then Hornblower series, that sort of thing. And I was quite tomboyish, I suppose, because growing up in Cornwall, we were in the country. I'd run around in the garden and had a very healthy sort of, fresh air, homegrown.
Fresh air English,
yes.
Yeah. Thai literature, let's quote unquote classic Thai literature, is famous for its rich variety of poetical forms. I mean, when did Western style prose fiction first make an appearance?
Novels and things like that.
Yes, that sort of, and what Western writers were influential.
More and more Thais came to study abroad, and so the novel, as we understand it, Western,
was imported.
Yes, was imported, and also they learnt methods of writing and ways to write and ways of looking at the world, and then went back and wrote. I think many of the people who wrote novels had been educated abroad. So, for example, Kukrit Bramod, which is probably the first Kukrit Bramod, who wrote Four Rains, Si Pandin, and that was one of the first books. It was actually the book that taught me to read Thai properly, because I suddenly realised how the tone markers worked and all that sort of thing. And it's a story, a family followed through four rains. So it takes place at the end of the beginning of the 20th century and goes right through to the mid-20th century. So, I mean, it's very classically structured in a Western way. Any Westerner would understand it.
Yeah. When you were growing up, did you see your mother read? What kind of things did she read or not? Or
she read a lot, but I don't really know again because she died when I was 15. So I mean, she wasn't. I mean, she made me read Anne of Little Women, Anne of Green Gables.
Yes.
All those sort of things.
And it's true those days. I know back in the day there were distences between
weren't there?
Children. Everyone was kind of in their own bubble almost.
I mean, she loved Edward Lear, and she loved poetry, which was nice. So those she would read poems to me and make me learn a few poems. But then I think, when you're an only child, you read a lot anyway.
Yes, absolutely. Books are your friends, absolutely.
Yes. And then if you suffer bereavement in childhood too, I think books are a very safe place to go to.
Absolutely.
And that's why I think they're fantastic. I mean, even now with everyone being so obsessed with their phones or whatever, I think a book takes you out of your bad situation and either into a great situation, someone else's wonderful life, or even if they're having a bad life, you then feel better because you think, well, actually, I'm not alone. And I think about a sad book is also very comforting, strangely.
Yeah.
Russian novels, obviously.
Russian.
Yes, I loved all that.
Of course, Dostoevsky.
Yes, Dostoevsky, and I mean, knowing that I was quarter Russian, I sort of thought that I had this sort of tragic Russian soul, And so I identified, but I think you asked me that later, but I identified a lot with Anna Karenina,
Yes. Contemporary Thai literature, in your view, would it begin after the popular uprising of the 14th of October 73?
It was an absolute monarchy until 1932.
Yeah.
And then in 1932 there was a revolution organised by people who largely studied in Paris, actually, where they learned a lot of revolutionary ideas. And then in the late 30s there was a kind of fascist regime, and then there was the Second World War, during which we let the Japanese come in and join the Allied, not the Allied side, the wrong side in the Second World War. After that, I think the emphasis was very much on redevelopment, Americanization, and then there were a lot of coups. So in terms of democracy, even in 1973, it was short-lived.
That was a big.
Yes, it was a huge student uprising against one of the dictators. And there've been, I think, 18 or 19 coups now in the past 80 years. So I mean, democracy hasn't really ever taken hold very well. And now, obviously, we're under a military regime. We've had a recent election, but the election was rigged, essentially. Yeah. I think, in a way, it has encouraged more people to write, Thai authors. And, for example, Prap Dayun has risen up during that time, and other writers before him. And then also the book that, I published in English, The Blind Earthworm.
Yes, which we're reviewing.
She was inspired by the recent military crackdown. And even though the book doesn't seem overtly political, underneath it there's a sort of strain of subversion, I would say.
Well, the title, The Blind Earthworm
Yes.
in the Labyrinth, is quite...
Yes.
I rather wonder what that is about.
Yes, I mean, superficially it seems to be about the protagonists, the two sisters, and their sometime lover and their lives. But perhaps underneath it's about the fact that no one really knows the way out, which I think is true now, because has the recent election brought closure? Are we in a new chapter moving forward? No, we're not. No. Because the military rigged it in such a way that they still managed to choose a prime minister. The military dictator is now prime minister. So nothing's changed in a way.
I mean, but is it censorship or something's allowed or?
Yes, I mean, when he first came in, one of the things that people did was we weren't allowed to have assembly of more than 10 people. So quite a lot of people would have picnics in the park. And the book they would read at their picnic in the park was George Orwell's 1984. And so that became a symbol of sort of protest. And they also did the kind of three-finger salute, which I don't know about it, but I believe it comes from Game of Thrones or something like that. And then funnily enough, then George Orwell, 1984 was banned. You weren't allowed to post a picture of it. But then, bizarrely, recently, the dictator himself came out and said he recommended that everyone read Animal Farm, which was so funny. And then lots of people started commenting and saying, yes, that's very appropriate because we're ruled by dogs and pigs. And I don't think he'd read it, actually. So that was quite amusing.
But also there's all that wonderful description of when they move into the house and have sheets.
Yes. One of the things that he said when he was coming into power was that he was going to clean up, corruption. And of course,
it's classic.
Yes, classic. Why do they always say that? Why not just say, I'm coming in because I want power?
Because I'm lining my pockets, yes, exactly. Power, exactly. Well, who knows? Would you say there is greater recognition and curiosity nowadays about writing from a non-English speaking world that is 5,847 miles away from the UK? I mean, how...
What do you mean in the world in general, or do you mean...
Well, about Thailand, there is a greater curiosity
I would
now,
say so,
and
yes,
since
definitely.
You've been publishing...
Yes, things have changed hugely.
Yeah, so it's improved, and the internet, I mean, what would you say the engines of change or
I would say that when I started, everyone said I was mad. Being a publisher in Thailand, no one would buy the books and that sort of thing. But actually, and they said Thai people read 11 lines a year or something, but that's not true. I mean, they think now that Thai people read 45 minutes a day. I mean, admittedly, quite a lot online, but I mean, I don't think we should keep bashing the online thing. I think people should read, and then it may lead to paper books or not, or whatever. It's like saying you shouldn't use a pen, you should use a pencil. It's sort of, I think that's a bit silly in a way. There are many more publishers and publishers who are successful, and the Bangkok Book Fair is very well attended. It's twice a year.
So you started River Books when? I mean the vision behind it. Let's hear about how
I don't think
happened.
I really had a vision.
Yeah.
I had started publishing in England with my ex-husband, and he'd published a few books on collectible items. And then his secretary walked out. I was doing my PhD, and he said, "Oh, you better come and work with me."
What your PhD in?
My PhD was going to be at Chamberet, who was architect in the 1930s. because I'd studied art history at the Courtauld Institute, so that sort of flowed on from that. I gave it up after that and did publishing instead. And then I found I really enjoyed it, because I think if you're someone who's sort of always been uprooted between this place and that place, if you're a publisher, you always have new projects, you don't get bored, and there's always something stimulating, so it's great. I mean, maybe it's good for people who have ADHD or something. Yeah. I don't think I do at all. I mean, I have very good concentration, but it just really worked for me. So having done this sort of publishing about subjects of really weird subjects in England, when we got divorced and I went back to live in Thailand for a while, I thought, well, actually, I'd much rather be publishing. I studied art history. Why not do things about Thai art and culture? And I looked around. Books for English speakers were very few at that time. They were either very superficial or they were kind of bodice rippers about patpong girls or things like that. Well, prostitution, sort of that, sort of salacious, badly written, badly written erotica. And so I thought it'd be nice to show the other side of the country, because people who visit, I mean, half the world are women, we're not so interested in erotica really. Yeah. There's a long history, so it was just sort of wanting to show other facets of the country.
And so you publish in both Thai and English?
Yes.
Sort of dual editions?
Quite often, yes. Yeah. Not always. I mean, the ones that I think are appropriate. I mean, if it's about Thai porcelain or something, I'll do a Thai edition as well. And guidebooks, I'm starting to do some in Thai. I do quite a lot of guidebooks. So then I started in Thailand, then I moved to, I also publish about Burma, Laos, Cambodia, done a lot of books about Khmer, ancient Khmer architecture, the Khmer Empire period, and a few books about Vietnam. Vietnam's very difficult because they have huge censorship there. You can't get the books in, yes. And also the pirating is much more of a problem there than in Thailand. I mean, I haven't seen any pirated copies of my books in Thailand. Whereas in Burma...
Why in Vietnam?
I don't know why, actually. Published a book on ancient Angkor, and I probably lost literally $1 million in pirated copies because it's so popular, it's everywhere. And there's nothing I can do about it. Beautifully printed too, as well. I mean, that's the upsetting thing. In Burma, they're appallingly printed, but in Cambodia, fantastic edition. We're very small, first one. We're quite niche, So one of the mainstays has been my father's book, this autobiography he wrote, because it's just...
Title again?
Gert Wang Barut. It's in Thai. And Jao Chi Wit. And my father's book, Gert Wang Barut, sells 2,000 copies every year. So that is one of the things that keeps the company going. And so we have a strand of royal history, which does quite well. Recently, for the coronation, I did a book in Thai, which was a translation of Quaritch, Wales' classic book on Siamese royal ceremonies, and then put in lots of pictures, and that sold really well. And then I do the travel books, the sort of, the guidebooks, but they're more standalone guidebooks. Thames and Hudson, when I was distributor, they had to say, Narisa, don't say guidebooks, say standalone books, because they can
special
be special, and they go into the histories. They're not superficial.
Like Planet, which is good, but it's a different.
Yes, it's a different thing. Highly illustrated. And one of the things is I print all the books in Thailand too, because I like to good production. And then I've developed a strand of popular culture. So there's a book called Very Thai by Philip Cornwall Smith, and that's been printed. There's been a second edition, first edition probably 3 printings, second edition probably 3 printings.
So what is it you say, popular culture, Very Thai?
It's a quirky book. It's why do Thais use tiny pink napkins is one of the examples. And he goes and researches it. And it shows the dye that they use to make it and everything else.
Why do they use tiny napkins?
Because they're tiny. I mean, it doesn't show the dirt or something, but you don't use them again. So, I mean, it's very weird. They think that people think they look cleaner in pink. And then alphabet tables and all kinds of little quirky things,
Katya and the Prince of Siam, which you authored with your aunt, Eileen Hunter. How did that come about? Tell us a bit about it.
It just is such a wonderful story. And I thought that in my father's book it's not dealt with well enough. And I found a lot of letters that she had written to her brother in Russian. I got them translated. In fact, by someone who I've now had confirmation was head of station of the KGB in Southeast Asia.
Oh my goodness.
He used to come to my house and do tiny little writing. He was a very weird guy. But he did translate them into English. for me.
Head of the KGB
I know,
translated?
I know.
Well, that's quite a...
It's so
quite
bizarre.
A coup,
Yes.
In a slightly strange way.
Yes, very strange. Yes.
Well, where is he now? I mean,
he's dead,
Oh, he's
unfortunately.
dead.
Yes, it was a while back. Eileen had written some books before, so it seemed a good idea to collaborate with her.
Well, I do remember Eileen.
Yes.
From when I was younger, because she was a good friend of my godmother, Leslie Blanche, and
she was a wonderfully
Eileen
stylish,
was
wasn't she?
woman,
Yes.
Extraordinary woman.
And when I used to go to school in Surrey, Priorsfield, my mother would come up and stay with Eileen, and then I would come out for lunch, and she was a fantastic cook. And I loved her house, actually, because my mother wasn't very interested in interior design, but Eileen's house was I thought it was incredibly chic. She had wonderful things, she mixed all these things. So it seemed a good idea. And, the book was well received and, it did very well. And since then it's been translated into Thai and also sells very well in Thailand. So I sell probably like 800 copies every year, which, that's what a small publisher wants.
Into other languages? Because it's rather extraordinary sort of love story.
It should be translated. It should be. No, I'm surprised really. I mean, but you see, this is the trouble when you're a small. Yes, you can't do everything, and I can't really go and sell rights. I need someone to go and sell the French rights or the Italian rights or something. Quite a few people have wanted to make a film about it too.
So you've mentioned one of your books. Tell us about some of the books that you're working on at the moment that will come out in the next 6 months.
So I'm working on, this one I showed you, the Thai movie theatres, is literally hot off the press.
So that is Movie Theatres, Relics, Ruins and the Romance of Escape by Philip Jablon.
Yes.
Fabulous.
And
beautifully produced book.
Yes, and that's in the sort of popular culture stream. And then also another one that's just come out is The Rabbit Cloud, which is by Guy Svastik, children's thing. Yes, age? I would say 8 to 12 probably. Yes, and that's a lovely story about a boy who goes in search of water for his village because there's a shortage of water. And then the ones that I'm working on, I'm doing in the sort of popular culture strand, I'm doing a book called Thai Comics Art. You have to say Thai Comics Art. And again, a lot of these books are written by quite intense people. So Philip Jablon, extremely intense. This is by a Belgian guy called Nicolas, who's actually a professor at Chulalongkorn University. But it's going to be fantastic because Thai comics are actually world renowned in the comics world as being very good. And they've been political comics and funny ones and historical ones. So they're a genre that isn't really recognised. And I think it's going to be very good. And there's a comics festival in Angoulême. I'm excited. I'm going to go to that. Not next year, the year after.
Excellent.
Also, in the sort of art history strand, there's a book which is going to be very beautiful called The Life of the Buddha in Burmese Murals. Going to be fantastic. And also a follow-up novel to The Blind Earthworm by Virapon Nidit Rapar. And the title, we're sort of wrestling with the title at the moment. It's called something like Recollecting the Memories of the Black Rose Cat. And it's
Black Rose Cat.
Yes. And it's a cat who's called Black Rose. And it's the sort of story, again, it's an more epic sweep of a Chinese family who've emigrated to Thailand from southern China and how they set up their business and how, the life of the family. So that, I think, should be very good. And also some Thai language books, quite a lot of those, and a guidebook for the area in which the hotel is situated, which is Old Bangkok. So it's called Exploring Old Bangkok. So it covers 30 sites and beautiful pictures and everything else. And then another popular culture one on the Hopewell project, which is this very strange project where they had these huge stanchions, I suppose you call them, for a elevated railway that was never built. And while they stood there neglected, artists came and painted on them, graphic art, graffiti artists, but also non-graffiti artists just came and painted there for a specific period. They became quite well known, and then afterwards they were painted over. So it's a sort of subversive phenomenon that's been covered up, which I quite like. I don't think it's not highly commercial, but I mean,
it can be cult. It sounds like a potential cult.
So that's the thing, really. When you're a small publisher, trying to do some books that you think are going to be commercial. Also finding out-of-print English books that then I can get translated into Thai. So a lot of British sort of authors who were in maybe the Shan States in the 19th century, or British people who came to Thailand in the 19th century, they sell quite well. I mean, I'm talking not very many, 2,000 copies or something. But, you know, they're cheap to do and you get through them quickly. That's what you have to do.
What about Thai writers and what strengths they draw from the richness of their cultural background and national identity, and how many books, you know, but how many books are available in West translated from Thai and regional dialects?
Quite a lot.
Quite a lot done.
Quite a
now,
lot.
really.
I mean, some statistics suggest that indigenous books account for 60%,
really?
but 40% are books in translation, so quite high. And I would say that of those, a lot of them are how-to books or, you know, guides to healthy living and finance, how to make £1 million, that sort of thing.
What genres are popular? You were just saying what genres are popular in Thailand, whether it's Thai authors or imports of translations. You mentioned how-to fiction. I mean,
Buddhism,
I mean,
sci-fi, and also
usual,
romance. Yeah, the usual ones. Yes.
Yeah.
Because before publishing really developed, I would say publishing's really got much more developed in the last 40 years.
In the last 40 years.
Yes, a lot of romance was published in weekly magazines.
Okay, serialised.
Yes, serialised. Yes, with sort of idealised drawings of beautiful women and looking miserable.
Wanting to be rescued by the prince.
Yes.
Because so in that case, when did the Bangkok International Book Fair start? I know it's very popular.
This century, I would say, yes.
Oh, right, okay.
And it is very popular because it's not a book fair like we might understand Frankfurt or the London Book Fair, where it's only professionals, only publishers.
So the
public come in and buy.
Like Paris Book Fair.
Exactly.
Nice. Yes,
and people love that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's very, very good. It sort of really promotes reading and people know that it's coming up. And so, you know, they know they're going to get a bit of a bargain, publishers discount, and then there are talks associated with it. And I started not really a literature festival, but an ideas festival about 4 years ago. I'm going to do the third one in January, February actually, 1st and 2nd. And then last year there was a Lit Fest, which was more for indie Thai publishers. Yes,
how many?
There were about 30 stalls and little talks and things, also some mainstream ones. So there, one of the key books that they just translated was Orhan Pamuk, My Name is Red, which I thought was very interesting actually. And so it's all about literature in Thai and lots of handmade books and everything. It was really good fun. It was very popular, but it was sort of owned by a printer who did it, and I'm not sure they're going to do it again. I'm in dialogue with them to try and combine, because I thought that my festival, which would have foreign writers and maybe non-fiction, combined with this fiction festival would be great.
Then very good to combine forces.
Yes.
So like here you have the big conglomerates and then the sort of mid-range indies and then the smaller. I mean, how are the big conglomerates, or are there a lot of independents? Or
there are lots of there are quite a lot of independents.
Any conglomerates or no?
Yes, some. I mean, like some, for example, Matichon, who have a big print empire, media empire. They also have a book publishing strand. And then Nanmi is quite a big publisher too, so they do a lot of books in translation. And then they're much smaller people, like me. I would say I'm a small publisher, But quite high profile, because some of the books I do are very nice.
Quality.
Yes.
How supportive is the government? Or do they give grants? Do they set fixed books prices?
They are very supportive, strangely. I mean, you might not have thought they would be, but they are. So they had
the Orwell thing you just said.
Yes.
They're suddenly saying Orwell read Animal Farm. That is.
Yes.
So there aren't banned books.
No, there are some, but they mainly relate to books about the king, because there's very strict lèse majesté rules. So anyone who, even if you write a self-published book about the king in which they consider discriminatory, you could be in trouble. But there are subsidies for books, and there are tax breaks for purchasers of books. So customers who buy more than 10,000 bahts worth, which is about £220 worth of books, over a period, if you keep your receipts, you can get a tax back. So, which I think, which is a really,
that's a very good scheme.
It's a brilliant scheme.
Really?
Yes. So I would say that they are very supportive, And obviously they increased their budget for books for the Ministry of Education. So this is, in fact, the Minister of Culture is actually quite supportive.
Your views on how technology and social media have changed your writing and publishing life, and are you an e-book reader? Well, you mentioned piracy, which perhaps isn't always, that's the dark side.
That is the dark side, the dark side.
Of it.
So the dark side, yes, is piracy, and not in terms of photocopying the books, but something like, I remember when Aung San Suu Kyi did her book Freedom from Fear, and I had bought the rights from Penguin, and someone just went ahead and translated and printed it, and I had to take them to court, and stop that publication. But actually I would say that in terms of promoting the books, I find the internet, whether it's on Facebook, or whether it's on Instagram or Line, I find it hugely helpful. Because actually Amazon isn't, I'm sure it'll come soon, but it isn't in Thailand. People can order from Amazon. It isn't yet, I'm sure. So I can do really well online. So I promote the books online through Facebook and other people and all sorts of things. And then there's a very good postal service where we can send the books by post, and people pay using their mobile phones. What
about e-books? How's the e-book
and e-books
market? I mean, do you do e-books?
So I do e-books.
Because to do these,
I do
e-books illustrated. How does that?
No, I don't think they work.
No, that wouldn't work.
And publishers generally, I would say, across the globe have found that there wasn't the take-up of highly illustrated e-books that they thought there was going to be. And am I an e-book reader? Yes, but sometimes do I want to read a print book? Absolutely. Because it's the cover, it's the whole feel of it. And I don't want to read on the screen all the time. But I'm going on holiday. Am I going to take 4 books on my Kindle? Yes. Is it great when I'm... Travelling is brilliant. Yes. And I do actually read Kindle on my iPhone. iBooks I read as well at night in bed, because also my husband goes to sleep earlier. So I read under the sheets, like I'm at school or something.
You don't want to wake him up, indeed. So for River Books, our brave new digital world is good. You're particularly active on Facebook, so we can find you on Facebook.
Yes,
River Books.
Yes, River Books, and we both have we have a London site, River Books London, and we also have a Thai one.
Yeah.
Okay. And the Thai one probably has more pictures, but probably the posts are actually written in Thai. Right. But then you can use Google. If I'm depressed and I want a good laugh, I go to. And no offence to Google, but I mean, the translations are very, very comical and a lot of fun. So I would say if you're depressed, go to Google Translate.
Nearly 80% of the UK's publishing industry wanted to remain in the EU. In the wake of Brexit, what are the implications for book publishing?
Yes, it's a disaster. It's a disaster. It's ridiculous. I don't know where to start and end on Brexit. I mean, there's nothing good about it in any aspect at all. I mean, the palettes even. Our palettes are the wrong size. So, dear Boris Johnson, yes, they are. So the next day, according to Boris Johnson, it would be so, hassle-free. Our palettes are the wrong size. They accept them now because we're in the EU. But if we're not in the EU, we'd have to conform. That's just one example. One example. And so I think it's the biggest mistake. And I blame a host of people. But I mean, for me, it will have less impact. And some people say, why do you get so upset? It's not going to have that much impact on you. You can go to Thailand. But I don't think one always has to feel passionately about things that directly impact oneself.
Yeah, exactly. A communal society. We are part of a whole bigger...
Yes, I care about everyone else who's going to be impacted. I mean, 80% of my sales are in Southeast Asia, but that doesn't mean that I don't care passionately about the EU.
So if you could go anywhere in time for one day, where would you go and why?
Yes, I've thought about this. I think I would go to Ayutthaya, which is Bangkok's ancient capital, and it flourished for 400 years. And it was a time of great openness, say the 17th century in Ayutthaya. One day I would go to the reign of King Narai. I would probably go to the day that Louis XIV's delegations arriving from Fontainebleau, and I think that would be fantastic, because by all accounts, Ayutthaya at that time was one of the greatest cities in the world.
Really?
It was a medieval city, 1 million people lived there. And the buildings were covered in gold, the temples were covered in gold, and there were traders from Portugal, France, Holland, Britain, Japan, Muslim traders. It was a total entrepot, and it must have been fantastic. So I'd love that.
What is left of it
You
now.
can go and see it now. It's in ruins now.
But no gold left, I'd
No
imagine.
gold left because it was sacked by the Burmese in 1767, and they took all the gold away, and a lot of craftsmen and dancers and cultural artifacts all went to Burma.
Your views on handling success?
Well, I don't think that's...
Power and all that. Well, you
I
must
don't know
have
if I...
seen something of how it affects
I don't
people.
feel very successful. I mean, I feel I'm happy that I've been able to do what I wanted to do, and that's a huge luxury, I think, and I'm very, very fortunate. But, you know, I think if you've grown up in Cornwall in the countryside, your feet have been planted in the ground really quite early on, and I think you're not that attracted by it. And, you know, when my son was starting his career as a singer and he was signed to go and sing in America, I sort of prayed that he would be successful, but not very successful, because I think that your life is not your own then, is it's taken away from you. I think I would just say, you know, one day's fame is another day's fish and chips, isn't it, really?
That's a wonderful way of putting it. Now, for what fault do you have most tolerance for?
Enthusiasm.
Is enthusiasm a fault? Oh dear.
Well, you know, excessive enthusiasm.
Excessive enthusiasm.
Yes, I like people who are really keen. I think it's, you know, people can say no about so many things, you know. Life can be hard, and I think you have to keep being enthusiastic, and I like that in people. And people I've hired, you know, when they've come for a job interview, maybe some people say they were too over the top or too whatever, but I thought, yes, they're really keen. I'll take that person. They may talk too much or be a pain later, but that's what you want, because doing books, for example, is so hard, and it's so much goes into doing a book that people perhaps don't realise, that you need to keep your enthusiasm levels really high.
Your heroes and heroines in literature?
Well, Anna Karenina, who's not really a heroine, but
Well, she is a extraordinary figure.
yes, I identify with her for no reason. I hope I'm not going to end under a train. You know, it's unlikely. I like Elizabeth Bennet because I just love Pride and Prejudice. I love Jane Austen. I like a lot of her. I like Emma. So I know they're a bit boring, really, but I like them.
And what about in real life?
In real life, well, I used to love Aung San Suu Kyi, but I'm very upset by her now. I've met Jung Chang a few times, and I like her a lot.
Oh yes,
and I love her book Wild Swans. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And as a person, she's so elegant and serene and fascinating. She came to Bangkok Edge, actually. She was a speaker there, and I thought she was great. I don't know. I don't sort of idolise people so much, and I wouldn't want people to idolise me. You know, I like to regard everyone as equals. I'm very keen on that. And in Thailand, that's quite difficult. People like hierarchical structures, but I don't like that.
Your favourite literary journals?
I like the London Review. Yes, London Review of Books.
London Review
I
of
like
Books.
that very much. And I also like the New York Review of Books, which they always give away free at book fairs. That's my treat for the, you know, and I sit and read that.
And your bedside reading?
I just finished The Salt Path, which is very easy to read. Have you heard about that? It's about a couple who everything goes wrong for. They lose all their money, and he's been diagnosed with a terminal condition. And she says, let's just go and walk the South Coast Path. And so I liked it. I almost finished it. I like it very much because it's saying poof to adversity and then being ready to change completely. And also I love the Southwest Coast Path, so, you know, that's got everything for me. And I'm also reading a book which I've just started called, and I'm not going to be able to remember the name of the author, called Memories, about a journey from St. Petersburg to Odessa in 1919, which I like. And it's by the writer who was quite famous at the time, and then she realised she wouldn't be able to publish anymore because of censorship after the revolution and the Civil War and everything. So she makes this journey, but sadly I can't remember her name at this point.
Now, your 5 favourite feature films?
I love Kozlovsky, The Three Colours. So I loved The Three Colours Blue, and I particularly liked it when she swims in the swimming pool, the heroine. What's she called? It's wonderful.
Yes, it is.
It's really, really good. I also like Pride and Prejudice. even though I don't particularly like Keira Knightley, and I could criticise it on many levels. And I also like The Conformist, Bernardo Bertolucci, and The Leopard, which I love that one too, because Alain Delon is so handsome in it. And also, Claudia Cardinale is fantastic. More recently, I like The Big Lebowski. How many have we done now? 4, I think. Yes. Yes. And Thai film. There's a Thai film I like very much called Khang Lang Pap, Behind the Picture. And actually that's a novel by Si Burapha, which has been translated into English. And it's a wonderful film. And it's very sort of, I don't know, I saw it in a particular place. It's about a woman who's married to a diplomat, and they go to Japan, and she falls in love with a younger Thai man, and he's in love with her for a while. They have an affair, and then it all goes wrong. I'm rather drawn to things that all go wrong, really.
Now, who would be in your dream book club?
Well, I think my father would be one of them, because he died when I was 7, so I never got to talk to him properly. So I would be very interested to see what he thought about books now and hear all his opinions, Otherwise, I think Margaret Drabble. I used to like her very much, and I think she would be interesting. And Greta Thunberg, because obviously I'm obsessed with global warming and climate change, and so I think it'd be very nice to talk to a young person. And then the Dalai Lama, because I think that, his wisdom, and I know he said some rather dodgy things about immigrants recently, not PC things about immigration. I just think it'd be fantastic. Exactly. Yes. People. Yes. And Prabda Yun, because I haven't talked to him enough, and he's a up-and-coming, he hasn't up-and-coming, he's a Thai author, who's, and I think he would be very interesting too. And I know that he reads literature across a very wide spectrum.
And do you have a motto?
Give it a go. Yes. On my tombstone, I'd like it to say, "She went for it."
Well, thank you, Narisa Chakrabongse. It was a great pleasure talking with you. And the River, so it's River Books
Press Limited. Yes.
And then the URL of the website. We'll have to look it up.
We do, yes. River Books BK, I think.
Yeah, okay.
.com, yeah.
But thank you very much for coming to talk
Thank
to
you.
us. It was a real delight.
Yes, it was great to see you.
Thank you.